I'm Neil Graham, and in this episode 3 of the Lowdown Show, our topic is a big one, India. I just got home from there a few days ago, and I'm going to weigh in on the experience of a Westerner riding in a country of over 1 billion people. Here's a spoiler. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever done, and maybe the most fun at the same time. Joining me to talk about India's role as motorcycling's new superpower is my Chrysler Cordoba driving pal, Michael Uhlarik, an international award-winning motorcycle designer, product planner, market analyst, and the founder of Motorcycle Global. During Michael's 25-year career, he's worked for Yamaha, Piaggio, Aprilia, BRP, Damon, Potential Motors, as well as consulted for a bunch of others. His work and analysis have been featured in the Globe and Mail, Reuters, Wired, the New York Times Online, and in most international motorcycle trade publications. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge? You're listening to The Lowdown Show. In my life, I've done some things on a motorcycle. Dragged a steel shoe, flat tracking, dragged the knee road racing, still do that. I've ridden off-road with Paris-Dakar winners with humiliating results. Shot myself into the weeds with high sides, low sides, and all sides in between. For a rider with decent, limited skills, I've done okay. Still here after all these years. But the most exhilarating and terrifying thing I've ever done, I did last week. And it was while riding on the street on a 40-something horsepower Royal Enfield. Charming, sure, but a bike just powerful enough to yank a chicken off its eggs. What did I do? I rode a motorcycle in the street in India. Now, some perspective. I come from a little country, Canada, that's nestled next to a very large country, the US. Kind of like a tick stuck in the ass of a very large dog. Now, I've always thought of the US as large. That is until you get to India. Now, Delhi, where I rode, is a city with the population of my entire country, 35 million. Delhi. But India isn't just about congestion. India, well, I think the best description I heard was a young man who said, Neil, India is not for beginners. So picture this, you're on a divided highway leaving the city. There are 4 marked lanes, all in the same direction. But in India, lanes aren't really lanes. They're more suggestions of lanes. And of course, suggestions everyone ignores. So take those 4, add the shoulder, that's 5 lanes. Throw in some spice, it's India after all. And you have 7, maybe 8 lanes of traffic. And it's absolutely lawless. The only rule is pass or be passed. Not sure if you should wedge your bike between a concrete barrier and a 3-wheeled rickshaw sort of thing. Here's how you determine. You take your handlebar, add 1/8 of an inch on either end, and if it fits, you go. Because if you hesitate, you'll be punted into the ditch by 22 motorcycles and scooters on your tail who want to get past you now, right now. Now, it's terrifying until you get used to it. At least I thought I was used to it. That is until on the same road, the highway, with 4 lanes, that's 8 lanes. And then there's a tanker truck coming up the wrong way on the shoulder, full of gasoline. Could you imagine this happening in the West in, say, I don't know, Chicago? The carnage of Range Rovers and BMWs careening into the ditch would be calamitous. But in India, everyone just deals with it. 7 or 8 lanes, squeeze this way, and there's no mayhem, and the gasoline tanker goes on its merry way. I witnessed traffic in India for the first time from the backseat of a cab from the airport, and I didn't understand it at all. I thought everyone was going to die. And yet, and this is really bizarre, I didn't see anyone, car drivers, motorcyclists, no one got worked up, no hand waving, no road rage. And then after a few days, I began to understand it because riding in India is a language, the only truly unified language in a country with, I think it's 22 official spoken languages, and I think 23 if you add English. And adding to the spice of riding in India is the very nature of the traffic itself, because India is rich, very rich, and very poor. You have a Bentley on the same road as a guy pushing a vegetable cart. And then Just sticking to motorcycles, you don't even need a motorcycle that runs. A bunch of times I saw a guy on a functioning bike pushing a broken down bike with his foot on the swing arm. And and then there's the question of how many people should be on a motorcycle in the first place. There are signs that say 3 on a bike is illegal. Come on, don't be so conservative. I think the most impressive feat I saw in India was a man on a motorcycle with, I presume it was his wife, because the entire family was with him. So in front of the man is a 5-year-old holding the handlebar. Behind the man is a woman wearing a sari, and because long flowing dress, doesn't really work when you're straddling a seat, she's side saddle. In front of her is an infant, so that's 4. And then you could just see the baby's head, this beautiful shock of dark hair. Now, what takes this to a MotoGP level of skill is that the man is also talking on the phone while he navigates a roundabout, and he's on a 125 or a 150. And of course, no one is wearing an airbag suit or a riding jacket or a helmet or even closed-toed shoes. My last day in India, I rode. So to do something like this, you have to get rid of your mirrors, get rid of your Western ways. You just look ahead and you trust that everyone is not going to hit you. And then everything fell into place. And my thumb, which is the most important thing for riding in India, found the button that unlocks the key to riding, which is the horn. But it's not a Western horn. In the West, we use the horn to say you're an idiot. But in India, the horn says, I'm here. I'm in your pocket. Don't move this way or don't move that way. In fact, on the back of every truck are the words, use horn. And what that means is just talk to me. Don't get angry, sweetheart. Use your words. I love it. And it works. Everyone lives, and 4 lanes of traffic accommodates this sheer madness of 8 lanes. And when you're in the middle of it, it's beautiful. It's a conversation. Mind you, it's a conversation between 25 people locked in the trunk of a car. Now, I have a confession to make. I've used the term, it was like a video game. I've overused it. We all do. But Indian traffic really is like that, especially when you incorporate the 2 things that don't think like humans, which are monkeys and cows. So first, monkeys. They're bizarre creatures, sneaky like raccoons, but with the manual dexterity of pickpockets. I don't trust them. They don't trust me. And at traffic lights, which are mostly ignored, they sit in trees and think bad thoughts and look down on you. So you have to really keep your head up. Now, far more terrifying than the monkeys are cows. And as most of us know, cows are sacred in India. And don't they know it? They roam the streets like teenage boys. They don't look where they're going. They don't care. If a cow decides to sleep in the middle of the road, traffic diverts around the cow. And they're everywhere. They're like mice with really, really large horns. So the thing that I wanted to understand is what happens if you hit a cow? Now, no one would tell me. I asked a dozen people. Their eyes would bulge, their mouths would fall open, and they'd say, don't hit a cow. Okay, I get it, I'd say. But what happens if you do? No answer. The best I could figure is that if you hit a cow through negligence on your part, you'll be stoned to death on the spot. And let's just say you hit a cow through no fault of your own. Well, you'll be stoned to death on the spot. So my advice, don't hit a cow. Now, India taught me that I need to relax. I am way too uptight. And I need to be thankful. India is beautiful. It's hideously polluted and poor, massively corrupt, and it's collapsing around itself. But this is also true, which is that India is the next superpower. It's China 20 years ago. We need to pay attention to India. Now, as a motorcyclist, a Western motorcyclist, I learned that Western traffic is not conducive to the safety of motorcyclists, which is not to say that riding in India is safe. 75,000 riders die every year in India. But that's in a country of over 1 billion with a very strong 2-wheeled culture. But here's what I got thinking, which is what if we could combine the awareness of Indian traffic with a little bit of the rigid structure we have in the West? In other words, what if we talk to each other instead of remaining in our silos of isolation? I've been told by a very good therapist that communication is the key to a successful marriage. Could communication also be the key to a longer life in the saddle of a motorcycle? You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. And now I'm going to tell you a heartwarming tale after I throw a log in the fire and tell you that eBay Motors is here for the ride. I'm going to talk about, well, since I got home from India, let's talk about Royal Enfield motorcycles. I'd never ridden one before, and I assumed they were these ridiculous relics from the past. And they are, but in a good way, not a bad way. So I rode an Interceptor, which is the 650 twin, and I was really impressed at how smooth it was. And it had a lot of that funky kind of English twin feel to it without the unpleasant, funky English feel twin to it. And then I rode pillion on the back of a, what is it, the Himalayan. And it was actually a lot of fun. And you could tell it was a single, of course, but it was not torturous. So I really want to ride more Royal Enfields because they're not like a Triumph Bonneville, which is a beautifully modern bike made to look old. The Enfield is an old bike that somehow has been modernized to not be as aggravating as a real vintage bike. And believe me, vintage bikes are aggravating. They're best left to other people. And I say this as someone who first rode on the street in a 1947 Indian hand shift, 47 Chief. So I know what I'm talking about, which is unusual. You're listening to The Lowdown Show. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. So, Michael, as you know, just got back from India. I rode in India, which was wonderful, wonderfully alarming. But can you tell me something about India as a force in motorcycling? Because I know it's something we've talked about together before. So just take me through what is India now, what it was, what it is now, and where it's going.
Okay, sure. So India is the world's largest motorcycle market. Some years it's been essentially tied with China on and off for the last couple of years, but it is definitely pulling out. The trend line is clear. So in terms of volume, it is the biggest motorcycle market, but also I would claim it is the most significant motorcycle market for a number of reasons. Number one, it's more motorcycle than moped. China is mostly moped, scooter, so step through. China, motorcycle is seen as a poor person's mode of transportation. It's for farmers, it's for people in small towns and rural areas. In India, that's also true. But in India, there is a motorcycle culture that's baked into urban life and into, let's say, the middle class. Among even like financially stable, urban office working Indians, a motorcycle, a motorbike, as they would call it, using their British sort of vernacular, it's seen as macho, it's seen as cool, not by everyone, but by a large number of people. And so in India, it is a motorcycle, sit on, gear change, clutch, gearbox motorcycle. That dominates the market, typically between 200 and 400 cc. The best-selling motorcycle in the world is probably something like a Pulsar, which Bajaj Pulsar, which most people in the West have never heard of. But it's a motorcycle. It's a real proper motorcycle. And in China, it's mostly step-through electric scooters. And the reason being is it was mandated by the Chinese Communist Party starting in 1995. We got to get rid of pollution in the cities, so everything was going to be electric moped and e-bikes. And, fast forward to today, and the aspiration of a Chinese person is to have a car and then have a prestige car. And while that's also true in India, there's a significant portion of the Indian populace who are like, yeah, no, I want a car. I still have a car, but I also want a motorcycle. That's pucka. It's cool. It's also the only way to get through traffic in many cases. So as you discovered. So absolutely the most significant market in the world. And then the second reason, and I think this can't be overstated, is the domestic manufacture, the clout and influence that domestic manufacturers have. Like, China had a lot of, like, hundreds of motorcycle brands, which have no real place in the Chinese cultural consciousness. In India, Royal Enfield, Bajaj, Hero, TVS, these brands are known and beloved. Now the Royal Enfield story is well known to the ADV rider community. As a British motorcycle brand that's, built a branch plant in India, back in the day, and then after the British firm collapsed, the Indian, branch plant survived its parent and is now a 100% Indian company owned by Eicher Motors, and it's a success story. It's the Harley-Davidson of the 21st century. It is a lifestyle brand. They sell 1 million motorcycles, but that's a pittance compared to Hero or Bajaj or even TVS, who sells multiple millions. Hero was started as a joint venture with Honda, and then eventually Honda went off on its own, and in India, and Hero is enormous. It was many times in history the largest by volume motorcycle manufacturer in the world, with or without Honda. Bajaj also is a very proud company that was originally manufacturing the Vespa, the Piaggio Vespa, under license. So like a lot of emerging markets, they initially started with products that were engineered or designed in the West, but like a lot of emerging markets, like Japan post-war or Korea in the 1970s and 80s, they developed their own domestic capability. And made in India is, it can be argued about the assembly quality or something like this, depending on brand. That's true everywhere, not just in India. But engineering prowess is strong. Technical prowess is good. And their domestic market is robust, and the brands have traction in India. So that's very different than China, where people buy the Chinese brands because they're cheap, but not aspirational. A lot of Indians find, Royal Enfield aspirational. They find a Bajaj, a TVS Apache or a Bajaj Pulsar 400 aspirational. So it's only going to get stronger.
Michael, I know you touched on it a little bit in your comments, but it's the scale of manufacturing in India that kind of blows the mind. Could you sort of compare, say, Indian sales to American sales of motorcycles, and just to give us a sense of truly how massive it is over there?
Sure. So, like in 2022, India purchased 16.5 million new motorcycles. And, it's important that we define motorcycle here. It's a motor and two wheels, but, in the context, again, of India, the vast majority of those vehicles are, about 200 cc, 10 horsepower, proper motorcycles with a gearbox and a clutch. So we're not talking, there are a couple of million scooters and mopeds, but the vast bulk of it is motorcycles. 16 million in a year. That means that the Indian market acquires more motorcycles in, a couple of weeks than the US market does in a year. The US market
Wow.
being about 500,000 vehicles.
Wow.
So it absolutely orders of magnitude more significant. Also in terms of like diversity, because unlike here where we have, in North America, and again, like I said in the last episode, we should exclude Mexico in that, even though they are North Americans, because Mexico is a very global, very large motorcycle market, very dynamic. The US and Canada is a very limited motorcycle market, less than 0.5% of world volume. And it's, very much focused on the luxury sector, which is $10,000 and up, and vehicles with more than 50 horsepower.
I was having a conversation with an Indian man who was a Royal Enfield rider, and when I was in India, and he said something really interesting, which is that he loves the idea that Enfield was once this English brand, which is now an Indian brand, and of course India is exerting its influence in. First of all, maybe you can talk about KTM and who the ownership makeup of KTM, and also some of the automotive brands, because there's it's the sort of reverse colonialism. The Indians are taking back what the English brought to them initially.
Well, for sure. And as Canadians, I think this is a story very close to home. Branch plants set up here by US companies, British companies in Canada almost always outlive their parents, and then become Canadian brands. And this has happened in India. So yes, Eicher Motors acquired, the Royal Enfield brand and the plant and the rights to the bullet and the name and the logo and everything. It wasn't just the rights to a name that gets traded all the time, especially in the vehicle world. But they actually got the tooling, and they were manufacturing the Bullet 350 and 500 essentially unchanged, just like the Hindustan ambassador was a Morris British built, and I'm sure you still saw tons of them when you were on your trip. This like 1950s little British commuter car. They were building with essentially unchanged tooling until pretty much the 1990s, and then it's been modified and updated. Now they're completely indigenous. The amazing story of India is that it isn't just a motorcycle growth story; it is a growth story. Period. Particularly in the last 10 years. People often who've never been there have this concept of this, very poor country, and there is definitely still poverty there, but they also miss the fact that it's a very high-tech country. They have very sophisticated, successful global technology firms in the internet space, in computing and software, in engineering, and Tata, which is one of the largest conglomerates. Think General Electric, like the old GE. Like Tata is in steel, and they own Air India, and an airline, and they own Tata trucks, and they make Tata cars. But they also own Jaguar Land Rover, and they just bailed out a steel plant in the UK. So there's definitely a reverse colonialism there. I mean, I don't like that term because of all the connotations, but they're strong. And many Indian companies are strong, and they're expanding, no different than any other successful firm from anywhere else in the world. And they're acquiring weak and sick businesses, particularly in the motor vehicle space, and doing joint ventures. And to your point about KTM, Bajaj had at one point over 50% of KTM. Now they have since divested. They're still a significant shareholder of. It's a complex structure, peer group, which owns and controls KTM and Husqvarna and now MV Agusta. But Bajaj was a key partner and remains a key partner. Without the Bajaj cash and volume production of small motorcycles in India, the KTM success story would look very different today.
Interesting. And you mentioned that Indian companies have been snatching up or investing into ailing, Western companies. Who do you think's next? I mean, could an Indian conglomerate ultimately own Harley-Davidson or Ducati or any of these other brands?
Not only could they should. I can already imagine, the eye rolls and everything else, but Ducati is a Italian, cherished icon, but it's owned by a German conglomerate. Previously to that, I mean, Ducati's been bought and sold many times, and it has struggled to be profitable along the way. But it was owned by Americans when I started my career. It was owned by the Texas Pacific Group, and I remember the headlines when that takeover took place. I was in Italy. I was working at Piaggio. And, there was the same feelings that I think Americans would have if Harley fell into foreign hands. It was like, oh my gosh, this would be like Coca-Cola being owned by, this was an analogy in an Italian newspaper. It would be like Coca-Cola or IBM being owned by Olivetti. And being a, North American, market person, I was like, so if it's good for the business, that doesn't change the factories in Bologna and it's made in Italy. And like Rolls-Royce is owned by BMW Group. The sheet metal comes from Germany because they don't trust the local equivalent. But the people who buy Rolls-Royce don't care. It's hand built in Newport Pagnell, and it's as British now as it ever was. And sorry, Crew, not Newport Pagnell. That's Aston Martin, I believe. Anyhow, so yeah, I think Harley-Davidson is a great acquisition target, especially as they continue their downward spiral. And I think it would make a fantastic asset, and it could actually be turned around properly with the clarity that comes with an external viewpoint. And maybe it's an Indian company that does it. They've got the cash. They're very good at business. They're very good at accounting. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, there's some funny accounting going on in Milwaukee. So, and has been for a long time. So, if they actually want to make money, that would be a really good way to go, I think.
But doesn't it come back to this idea that I think as we get further away from a World War II specifically, it's less country of origin than it is brand. I mean, brand is everything. Right? We don't buy things based on quality. We buy things based on aura, and brand
Perception.
is just brand is us, and it's where we align ourselves with a product. Is that not true?
100%. When Generation X, myself, or boomers were young, you mentioned the Japanese, introduction of Japanese motorcycles to North America back in the 1960s and 70s. I'm 50 years old, and so I'm not a boomer, but the vestiges of that whole Jap can, rice burner, all of these, frankly, deeply racist and stupid, ignorant comments that existed well into my high school years about Japanese cars and motorcycles. They were founded on this perception that was originally true in the 50s and 60s. A lot of things made in Japan were low grade. They were low cost. They did have problems. Honda, imagine this, made some terrible motorcycles. And Hodaka and Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Meguro, like they all made some real dogs, and they had qualitative issues. They resolved them. And then they, as we all know, took over the industry. The modern motorcycle is a Japanese invention. And that is, maybe a topic for another time. But that transition from imported low cost, commodity to world dominating, defining leadership position is constantly happening. And I think it shouldn't come as a surprise that we're seeing that happening, with cars from Korea. It is now undisputed that, Kia, Hyundai, Genesis, these are exceptional automobiles on every level. And they're indigenous. They're not like they needed Western help. No, they're made in South Korea, designed in South Korea, engineered in South Korea. And India is doing the same with motorcycles. And you ask a young person, anyone under 25, what is a Genesis car? And they'll just say it's a really good car. They don't know that it's made in Korea. They don't care that it's made in Korea. They just know it looks cool and that it's technologically sophisticated. And the same goes for my generation. To us, made in Japan is a seal of quality. But most people, even, most consumers, they don't know that a Lexus is Japanese, that it's a Toyota product. Most people just know it's a luxury car. So really, to come back to your point, brand is everything. The product is everything. If you make a great product and you build a strong brand, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter who's controlling the interest is. Harley-Davidson will be American until the end of time, irrespective of who was the majority shareholder. And, I think if you looked into it, you'd be surprised by who the majority shareholders are of most of these firms. It doesn't matter. It doesn't influence the enjoyment of something because a Ducati is ultimately owned by a company registered in Wolfsburg, Germany.
In closing, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.